Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm a mixed media sketchbook artist, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you a sketchbook flip through of my finished Royal Talens sketchbook. So I tend to do my sketchbook tours in two halves because, as you can see, they do have a lot of pages. So if you didn't catch the first half, then I will link that up in the cards and down below in the description box because we're going to be starting halfway through. It also means you don't have to wait as long to see it because this sketchbook definitely took me a lot longer than some of my smaller ones to fill. I tend to work in the smaller 13 by 21 centimeter Royal Talens sketchbooks more regularly, sometimes daily, because it just feels more manageable. And when I do want to work a little bit bigger, then I'll reach for this one, which is the 21 by 30 centimeter size. So a tiny bit bigger than A4, but not by much. So let's just get to the page we got to last time. And if you've been on my channel before, you will know that Royal Talens is my go-to sketchbook of choice, simply because it's really reasonably priced. I think it's really affordable for what it is. It takes a lot of media, so you'll see that in some of the coming pages, just how much I can throw at these sketchbooks. But this is where we got to last time, so here we are halfway through the sketchbook. And you might notice that I am a little bit more loose. So I think when I started this sketchbook, which was ages and ages ago in 2020, so July 2020, you'll see that my style has completely changed. And I do talk a little bit more about that in the first half of this sketchbook tour, but it's very different to how I used to work now. And you'll see there's a lot more swatching, it's a lot looser, and I do think it's more loose than my smaller sketchbooks as well. So I haven't dated this, but this was around September 2022. And this was following a Patreon session with Emma Carlisle. So it was a theme about sort of like underground. So it was like we were doing a cross section of this woodland. And I love this spread. I'm really pleased with it. If I remember rightly, I did do it a couple of times. I did try it in my smaller sketchbook. I wasn't pleased with how that turned out, so I decided to go bigger. And I think this one is definitely more successful. It was just a really fun concept. I love the colours. This was when I was using a lot of pink in my landscapes, and I think that works really nicely. I was really conscious about not making this too dark, which is something I learned from the smaller one I did. So I tried to keep this nice and light with lots of ochres, and it's nice and loose as well. I think there's a good balance there. So it's mostly done with gouache and coloured pencils and Neocolours. So these were some sketches for ideas for my Christmas cards. So I was doing them quite late in 2020. I was just playing around again with gouache. I always struggle with Christmas cards, so I do a new design every year. And I do find it difficult to know what to paint without being too twee or too predictable. So here we just have a snowy landscape, a random little car, and then a red cardinal. I didn't go forward with any of these, but it definitely helped to get me going and try to work out what I did want to do for that design. And this was a bit of an experiment. So I remember I was feeling a little bit burnt out. I just finished my year-long daily art challenge in August. I think this was September, October time. So this is part of what I did for the design. So you can see the Christmas card design that I did go for in 2022 right here. And I really like it. So I photoshopped two of my designs together, a painting of the landscape and then this robin. And this was actually done with some collage. So some of the leaves, the berries, and then the robin itself is collaged together from some of my paint palette sheets. I also played around with brown paper here, and this was just really fun. I'm really pleased with this. Obviously I didn't finish it, but I really like the elements that I have done, and I really like the colours. This one kind of links on, but I was just getting into using pastels. So these are using some Jackson soft pastels, which I don't use often, but I was really having fun just playing with the textures. Because I was quite burnt out, I was trying to just focus on different elements, and I really love some of these. I really like the colours, and I really love this twig and like the branches down here at the bottom. You can definitely see how this was linked from this one, of trying to explore and just push that idea a little bit more. I'd always planned on finishing this, but obviously I didn't. But I still really like this, and it was fun because this is a little bit slower than I work now. So it's nice to see that and see how my style has developed from this point. This spread was painted and created for a tutorial on my Patreon. So somebody asked how I paint rocks and stones. So this one on the left is a river where I was trying to focus on larger rocks and boulders, and then over here we've got a very pebbly beach. And you can see I was quite loose here, I was very loose in the sky, using my gouache layer, quite watery, and then coming on top to refine it and create these rock and pebble shapes using my Neocolors and pencils. Just really using the line work, and I think that tutorial turned out really nicely, and I'm really pleased with this spread, especially this beach. I really love the textures on that page. This was another one that was painted on Patreon, so I actually filmed this spread on a Patreon live stream, so it was live on YouTube, and it was celebrating my 1 year on Patreon, so it was quite a long stream. And I'm really pleased with this. I absolutely love the textures. Again, I think I was playing with that softness from the pastels and building it up slowly, and I really love how full this is. I also like some of the birds. Their shapes aren't quite right, but I think it works as a spread. I like the oak leaves, and I remember just playing with the materials, playing with acrylic ink as well, and trying to build up those textures. So I really like the softness against the harshness and the colours of the birds. So still really fond of this spread, and I really like how it's edge to edge as well. It feels really full of life. This was a Jackson's order, so I just invested in some pan pastels. I started with the Jackson's soft pastels, like the little sticks, and then I was really keen to see what the pan pastels were like and playing around with those textures. So this one I think is a stick pastel, and then these ones are the pan pastels, and I thought it was really interesting, the texture and like the difference, because obviously they're a lot softer and smoother to apply. I also had bought some Derwent drawing pencils, some Luminants, and 2 Poscas. Actually, these might be the very first time I bought acrylic markers. So I started with the beige, which is still a huge favourite of mine, and the slate grey. So that's really cool to see when I actually got them, because they're definitely a staple in my art supplies now. This was done on a live stream with TJ, so Sketch It Studio. Very different to what I normally would create. Like I say, I do think I'm a little bit looser in this sketchbook than I am in my smaller ones. So this was acrylic ink, some very autumnal colours mixed with some of that blue pastel as well. So I don't love this, but it was just very free, just creating lots of colours and using shades that I don't often use. Okay, I love this spread. This was also done on Patreon. This was our November 2022 live stream, which was on the farm. And it is quite loose and messy. Obviously, we had timers, so each panel was done, I think it was around 7 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes. So you can really see how loose a lot of the backgrounds are. So it is quite messy, especially when you look closely, but I think overall this spread has a really nice vibe. I'm using a lot of my favourite greens. I like the pops of red throughout as well. And it just feels really cosy and wholesome. It feels very cottagecore. I like some of the blues. So this was done with Tombows as well. So I did mix a bit of brush pen in with the gouache and my coloured pencils as well, just to outline some of these. So that's interesting to see my outlines back then as well. And just filling this whole spread using all of those references. It was a really fun one, definitely one of my favourite sessions. So this was another spread. Again, I filmed this for a tutorial on Patreon about using negative space. So we're into December 2022 here, and this was, like I said, created with negative space, so filling in around this shape of this raspberry plant and then filling that in on top with the pencil lines. This one I put down a block of purple and then used my Neocolors around it to create these bluebell shapes. And again, just playing with different colours around the shapes. I think this one's my favourite with the fern, but not necessarily using just one colour behind, but playing around with lots of different ones. This is done with acrylic paint, so it is quite rare that I do use acrylic paint in my sketchbooks, but I did this in tandem with another one, so I think we were on to my second daily art challenge, which was 100 days, which I started in January 2023. I did a second version of this landscape in my smaller sketchbook, so sometimes I like working in tandem, small and large, and learning from each of them. So I think this one was better than the other one. I really like some of these blocky shapes, some of the brush marks from the acrylic, and also working on top of this pink base I put down, which adds a lot of warmth. I don't think I used any pencils on this spread, so just acrylic and Neocolors, but I really like the vibes of this one, which I think comes from using a bit more pink. Okay, this is a spread that's filled with pastel, so I can still feel that on my fingers because I don't tend to fix my pages. I don't like using fixative in my sketchbook, so I usually just use scrap bits of paper in between so it transfers onto here instead of the artwork. But this one, I remember, I'm not super pleased with it. I don't think the shapes of the hills are quite right and I don't have that distance, but it was really fun to play with my pan pastels. So this is, I think, the first spread in here where I was really using the pan pastels from that haul and experimenting how I want to use it and how I can make it work in my style. I think it's always really fun getting new art materials and seeing how you can use it with what you already have, especially as a mixed media artist. So this was really helpful in just playing and seeing how I can use them. I can see I've used brush pens here as well as a bit of collage. So these pink houses were again cut from my paint palette sheets. This one I never shared. This was from a Sarah Dyer Patreon session. Very different to what I would normally draw, but these were references from her photos when she went to a museum. So again, I was playing with the pastels, really trying to see how I can use them, mix them with gouache here and coloured pencils, and it does create a really nice softness. This one's a bit dark for my liking, but I think these two are a bit more successful. So these two were actually done for a client, so this was turned into some greeting cards. I can see that I used some masking fluid to create the frame. When I was doing my 100-day project, that was a theme I was working with in a lot of my sketchbooks where I was playing with greenhouses. You can see a few of my experiments here, but this definitely tied in from that, and I used mostly brush pens for the base layer and then worked on top with coloured pencils. This one looks unfinished because I finished it off on my iPad and added things in digitally. This was a session on Patreon again, so a live Zoom call where we were looking at patterns in the wild. This was very fun for me because I used oil pastels, which again I don't often use, but it was very fun to use the brighter colours, and I think it worked really well with these animals. I think my favourites are these painted storks and their really fun pink legs. I was disappointed with my zebra. I liked creating the pattern, but I think it's just it's not stylised in the way that I want. And as you can see, it is quite a messy medium, so again I just used paper in between my pages to try and stop it smudging. You can still see it has a little bit here, but this was just a fun one to use a different material. Here's another one where I've put in paper here, so you can see it does transfer, but it transfers onto this rather than the other side of the art. And I'm really happy with this one. This was done on a Patreon session with TJ, so Sketch It Studio. I'll leave a link to everyone that I've mentioned down below in the description box. But as you can see, this is full of colour. It was an underwater theme, and I think this one just turned out really nicely. It feels very finished, and I like some of the different elements. It did take a very long time. I didn't finish it in her session, but there's a lot of lovely textures. I used dough and ink tints, gouache, coloured pencils, brush pens as well, so I threw a lot at this, but I think it worked really nicely. And yeah, this was just a really fun one to do. I really like the end result. Two panels which were done on an Emma Carlisle Patreon session. I can't remember what the theme was, but I really like the softness here. Again, I've used my pan pastels. I do go in phases with my art materials, so sometimes I'm really into using pastels, sometimes I'm really into using acrylics, but this was still using the new supplies I just bought, so I love the softness. I'm really pleased with this spread. I think it works together really nicely, and I do like the colours. There's some Ecoline brush pens here and coloured pencils. I really love this duck in the foreground, and I like the addition of the people as well, which isn't something I do often. So these two spreads were created when I first got acrylic markers. So that is in a video somewhere. I don't know if it's on Patreon or YouTube, but I'll link it wherever it is. So this was when I first got my Montana markers, and I was really playing around with using them. I hadn't used them before, so these were very experimental. I definitely prefer this one on the right. This one on the left definitely feels overworked, and I think that was something I was just playing with, of blending them together down here in the foreground. I finished them off with coloured pencils and Neocolours, and I think adding that detail on top definitely helped. It was quite a messy base layer because obviously with the acrylic markers you can't get super fine lines, so I think it tidied things up really nicely while still keeping that looseness. This was one done on a Patreon Zoom session again. This was an urban versus rural, so a lot of my drawings from that session are in other sketchbooks. But this one was a painting from a photo I took in New York. Again, I can see the acrylic markers coming in here, so I think I was starting to move on from pan pastel into my acrylic marker phase. I can still see some of that blue up there though from the pastels. But really fun one. I don't often draw city scenes, so this was really nice, and I do like some of these smaller details. This was painted as part of my Derwent Inktense collaboration, so using my Derwent Inktense blocks. So this was for a reel, so again I'll link that below, but the full process is on my Patreon. And it just amazes me how much it changes when adding the water. So I put down the dry blocks first, and then I came in with my water to really fill this out. And I think it's really fun. I definitely enjoyed using them that way, and then coming in on top with my Derwent Inktense pencils. Really vibrant, really vivid, so definitely different vibes to some of my other landscapes, but I think it works really nicely, and I like the looseness that they bring. Okay, here I can see that I was mixing a lot of media. I've mixed my acrylic markers with some pastels, so the texture there. A lot of the base here was done with my acrylic markers, so again, really learning how I can use them, and I'm pleased with this one. This definitely feels like the work that I want to create. Feels very fun and joyful and lots of texture, which is something I'm exploring at the moment as well. This was one that I did record here on YouTube, so playing with my mixed media and basically throwing everything at the page, so it held up really well. Again, I'll link that process, but there's a lot of acrylic markers here, Derwent Inktense, some Neocolors as well as coloured pencils, loads of different things, but I really love this. I like the colours, I like that it's not too muddy or dirty, and then adding in that dark indigo and finishing with this pop of Neocolor works really nicely, and I think the colours are really working together. So definitely one that I enjoyed and something I want to do more of. This was done as a celebratory live stream, so that's available on my YouTube channel for everybody to watch under the live tab, so you can see the replay of this. But I painted this sunset scene with gouache and then this chicken again with gouache and some acrylic markers. So this one feels a bit too messy for me, but I really love the vibes in this. It's got a really nice warm atmosphere from the pink and the orange, and it was nice to use a bit more purple as well, which isn't something I do often in my work. But if you want to see this one come together, I will link the live stream. So I didn't share this anywhere either. This was actually drawn on a short breakaway in Wiltshire, so this was drawn from our cabin in the woods. Again, I took my acrylic markers with me. I don't think it was very successful. I don't love it, but I was trying to really get that distance and the depth of the forest. It was quite misty, so I was trying to show that. I think I layered a light blue marker on top, which is how I tried to push it back, but yeah, just a quick study, and I obviously didn't do anything on the other side either. This was a very fun spread. This was done as part of Emma Carlisle's Patreon session, so very quick frogs. And from this point I definitely used my sketchbook more, so this A4 sketchbook got a lot more use from September until the end of last year. But these frogs took 1 minute and these ones were 2 minutes, so the point of the session was to have really fast timers and just see what you came up with, because I think it adds a lot of energy in your work. So there's a heap of mixed media here. There's some brush pens, some coloured pencils. The longer ones I was wetting my finger with Derwent Inktense and smudging that on the page. And smudging it means it goes down in a really thin layer, which helps it to dry quicker, which is really helpful when you are working fast. But there's a lot of character here and there's some really funny little faces, so I'm really happy with this spread. This was done on one of my Patreon live streams, which I'm not very happy with this spread. We were experimenting with landscapes and people, so combining settings and my people month, and I redid this in my sketchbook. So I'll pop that on the screen so you can see how I took the references and did them again, because for me this was just too dirty. I tried to add that distance by adding the pan pastel over the top of my gouache layer, and I just don't think it worked. It does feel quite dirty and it doesn't have any atmosphere, so I think the redo that I did in my smaller sketchbook definitely worked out better. These were very fun to paint. Again, I've got a YouTube showing the process, but I used my acrylic ink. So like I said, I do go in phases with my materials, but for this one I knew I wanted to use acrylic ink, and I loved the way that they turned out. These were studies of pumpkins that I've seen on a walk when visiting a National Trust property, and I just really loved the blending, the way that things have merged together, but not getting too muddy, and to keep those really clean colours. And then going on top with my coloured pencil just to refine some of the shapes and add in some more of the textures before finishing it off with my typography. So a really simple spread, and it was quite a quick one, but I loved the result. So here is another session. So it was linked to the other farm session that I did on Patreon. So this one here, because we loved this session so much, I decided to do it again. So this was a year and a month later from this one. And again, I really like it. I think I can really see that I have worked faster and it feels a bit more refined. So it's really cool to sort of do the same theme and also have it in the same sketchbook so I can see just how much it's developed. I use the same materials, so there's a gouache base layer and then some brush pens and coloured pencils on top. This was more of an autumnal theme, so there's some apples and pumpkins. We've got the cows here, which I think is probably the least successful panel, but there are some elements I really like, including this little house. And I like the colours, the vibe feels really nice, and I like the blobby panels. So I used to do all my panels quite squared off, and this is where I was starting to play with the shapes, which feels very fun to me. This spread I had prepped. This was when I was prepping my sketchbook to go to Vienna with some acrylic paint in the background of my spreads, but I never came back to this spread and filled it or added anything on top, so it just stays like this painty base layer. So this was when I was filming my comparison video about coloured pencils. So lots of different ones here. Faber-Castell Polychromos, Prismacolor Premier and Caran d'Ache Luminance. And then lots of different tests to see the difference in their lead, how they blend and how they layer. So an interesting spread and definitely helpful for me to see what the differences are between these popular brands. This is probably one of my favourite spreads in this sketchbook. I remember having so much fun with it, and again I did film this, so this is on my YouTube channel as well. I filmed it as a video to show all the different ways you can use dough and Inktense products. So there's the really big XL blocks here, the smaller Inktense blocks, and then the Inktense pencils. And I just love it. It feels really energetic. It's quite frantic, but it does feel like there's enough detail to know what it is. I liked adding in some of the line work where I dip the pencils into water, so it gives that really nice thick and rough line, which I think works really well, especially for these drawings which were inside the Palm House. So I took some photos when I was in the Palm House in Vienna, and then I came home and I drew these. It just feels very joyful, and this is a really fun spread for me to look back on as well. This was from a haul. Again, I filmed it for YouTube, so if you want to see that, there's going to be so many links below, but I do like sharing my process, so obviously there's going to be a lot of videos that correspond to that. This was a haul I bought around November time. Some gouache, so some of these are Winsor & Newton gouache colours. We also have some acrylic ink, some coloured pencils, and then a couple of acrylic markers. And then I use these colours and those shades to draw this. And I really like this. Again, I've got that pink, so I think pink is something that I really enjoy using, and although it's not often in landscapes that we see with our own eyes, I think it's really nice to add to it. It really adds that warmth, and it's definitely something I enjoy using. And I think seeing that throughout, like even if it was a few years ago, it's nice to have that constant in my style that I know feels very me. So I really like some of these colours. I like the way that it all layers together. And again, it's got that looseness, but still feels like there's enough detail there to tell you what's going on in the scene. This was our very last Patreon Zoom session of 2023, so December, and it was a festive sort of theme. I found these images from Pexels, and this one was my own one taken when I went to Prague in December. And I wanted to create a theme of like wreath making, so I really like how these turned out. I didn't finish it in the session, so I finished it later on and worked into it because the 2 hours we had wasn't quite enough. But I've put these blob shapes down again. I used my beige Posca, which you can see mostly in this one, to put down the base shape, but I did that for both of these. And then I took some out of the panels and I really liked that effect. I think it works really nicely, and added on a little bit of a poem that I wrote. And again, I've used more red, which I don't often use, but I still got a bit of that pink. The beige Posca is very me, and then some blue and white. So I really like the vibes of this one. It feels very festive, and I really like some of the textures. I remember having real trouble with her face, so I did that a few times, but I don't think it's overworked. I think I managed to get the balance okay. And then our Patreon Zoom session for January was a line workshop. So I ran a session for my patrons where we were exploring line and really playing with continuous line, playing with different colours, different materials. And that goes on to this spread as well, where we were trying out using line and then colour and shape and then line on top. So really interesting session. I think we all had a lot of fun, and I really like some of these. I think it's really helpful to just play, to do really fast warm-ups and just test out your order. So I know which ones I prefer, but it was still really helpful to try different methods and see what works. This was filmed for a Patreon video last month as well, so I was exploring line for January. So here I did line first and filled it in with my watercolour, and then this one was using my acrylic markers, and that was really fun, using multiple line colours rather than just the one. And I think there's a lot more play and energy in this one, but I can definitely see the positives of both, and I think they both work really well for what they are, but there's definitely a difference in energy, and I found that really fascinating. This was for the most recent haul that I shared here on YouTube that I published last week. So there's a few things that my husband brought back from Vienna for me, and then some that I bought myself. If you want to see the products used here, I'll link them in the description box. Then some more swatching. So I tend to go to the back of my sketchbooks to add in my swatches. So this was when I was first mixing up my acrylic markers. You can see I didn't have a piece of paper here when I was working on the other side, so it has transferred. But I just prefer to do a lot of my sort of messier swatches towards the back of my sketchbooks. Having said that, I do also have this drawing, which I didn't share anywhere. I think I did this around November time last year. So it's got that spooky vibe. I used my acrylic markers and then also tried to build up some more textures and have that really bold sky, which I really enjoyed doing, to draw this little haunted house scene. This was definitely when I was mixing up those markers, so it links on with this one. These were like my final colours, and this was when I was still mixing them, trying to get the colours that I was after, because I mixed my own acrylic markers with the Montana refills. And there's a whole video about mixing my own markers on my Patreon. And that's it. So I didn't fill this last spread, but that's everything in this sketchbook. So it was really, really fun to fill. It's very rewarding having a very full sketchbook and also having it span over multiple years. So sometimes I do compare myself with other artists. It feels like I take ages to fill a sketchbook, or that I'm not filling it fast enough, or I'm not creating enough. So I hope this sketchbook and this video shows you don't have to fill it all in a really short amount of time. Obviously the very first page was done in 2020 and I finished this in January 2023. So a huge span of time, but actually I think that's quite nice to be able to see the very beginning of my art journey and seeing where I am now. And I think it's really rewarding. I love seeing how I've developed. I like seeing the themes evolve. I like being able to see the art material phases I was in when I got them. So I've really enjoyed looking through this. I hope you have enjoyed coming with me. If you do have any questions, please do let me know down in the comments. But I'm excited to start a brand new, larger sketchbook, and I hope to share that all with you really soon as well. I hope you have a creative week, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later.